안녕하십니까. 저는 국민연금 기금에서 투자정책위원장을 맡고 있고 수탁자 책임전문위원회의 상근전문위원인 신왕건입니다. 오늘 이렇게 뜻깊은 NH-Amundi 행사에 모더레이터로 참여하게 돼서 대단히 기쁘게 생각합니다. 근데 지금 이제 우리 ESG 세션을 시작할 텐데요. 시간이 많이 경과가 돼서 굉장히 의미 있고 좋은 자리인데 지금 이 세션이 조금 짧게 끝나야 되지 않을까 하는 생각이 듭니다. 아무리 강의가 좋아도 지금 점심 식사를 앞두고 있는 상황에서 너무 길어지면 평가 점수가 후하지 않기 때문에 그런 생각이 들고요. 그래서 우리 두 연사께서도 조금 더 빠르게 진행을 하는 것이 어떨까 생각이 듭니다. 저는 아까 이제 여러 가지 좋은 그런 인사이트를 하면서 국민연금의 상근위원으로 한 5년 근무하면서 이제 생각했던 것들을 많이 이제 떠올리게 되는데 ESG 세션에서 국민연금의 경우 ESG 활동은 지금까지 어떤 규정 중심적 어떤 규제를 지키고 문제가 있는 것을 피해가는 쪽에 너무 집중하지 않았나 하는 생각이 듭니다. 그래서 국민연금도 이제 어떤 ESG라는 말을 지속 가능성이라는 말로 이제 변화시키고 그래서 지속 가능성에 있어서 어떤 투자 기회를 찾는 그런 적극적으로 활용하는 쪽으로 넘어가려고 하는 상황에 있다라고 하는 말씀을 드리겠습니다. 이게 국민연금의 수탁자 책임 활동을 얘기하기에는 시간이 이제 없고요. 그래서 이번 세션은 두 분의 연사를 모셨습니다. 먼저 티모티 줄랑께서 이 아문디의 책임 투자 관점에 대해서 발표를 해주시겠고요. 두 번째는 야스 이와나가 님께서 스튜어드십, 특히 기업과의 대화 인게이지먼트를 중심으로 해서 설명을 해드리겠습니다. 그럼 먼저 티모티 줄랑의 발표를 들으시겠습니다. 부탁드리겠습니다.
Well, thank you everyone for having us on stage. I'm glad actually that I survived the snowstorm of the night to deliver three simple messages to all of you. Number one, to reassure my colleagues and my wife, I'm there. You couldn't reach me because I was stuck in the airplane, then at the custom, and to find a taxi. Second, to thank the CEO of NH-Amundi, Mr. Lim, for organizing this great event, which is really a testimony of the beautiful relationship and collaboration that we have between Amundi and NH and NH-Amundi. And actually, ESG and sustainability has been at the core of that partnership and relationship over the past few years, and we've been very honored to collaborate with NH-Amundi teams over the past years to discuss market trends, client demand, dynamics, and secular trends. Which leads me to my third simple message, is to reassure everyone in the room, because some of you who are monitoring responsible investment markets and trends may feel that we're a bit in the myth of Sisyphus. If you are not familiar with the myth of Sisyphus, is that mortal who was perhaps too proud and talked too highly to the gods and was condemned to push a rock uphill, and every time he was close to the top, he was pushed to the bottom and had to push that rock up again. And when you look at ESG market trend and sustainability, it may feel that we're in that myth. Because if you look back at last year, in terms of our convictions and our key messages, where were we? We were in a moment of so-called ESG backlash, with many headlines saying that ESG was dead. It was a bit of the swan moment. But Amundi provided a very nuanced view actually to what was going on the market with very positive convictions. Positive conviction underpinned by objective indicators and trend analysis. Number one, in terms of fund flows, it was a year of significant net outflows, minus 76 billion all in all in the fund industry, plus 25 billion positive net flows in sustainable investment funds with the highest value proposition. Performance-wise, you were looking at ESG indices across the board, regardless of their methodological biases. We were in very positive territory, compensating for the losses that we incurred in 2022, with positive long-term outperformance over the past 10 years. Third, key indicators that we followed, what was happening in the corporate boardroom. Yes, there were headlines about setbacks, but the level of commitment from companies worldwide kept increasing. If you looked at SBTi figures, it was plus 67%, plus 67% of companies taking new SBTi commitments, which are, if you want, the most ambitious climate commitment one can take as a corporate leaders. And these were supported by secular trends. Green Industrial Policy, Inflation Reduction Act, Net Zero Industrial Plan, the China public policy to be a green tech leading countries. There was a big secular trend. Demand for sustainable finance increasing, another big secular trend. And so we had a very upbeat tone actually, and we were very bullish in our conviction to sustainability. But now we're back in December, sharing our conviction again, and we just had the results of the elections in the US, a new political cycle in Europe with a new commission, talks about lowering the ambition, lowering the bar in terms of green deals, and updates as well in Asia in terms of slowdown, notably in China. So where are we? Well, looking at Amundi first, the news I'd like to share is that our conviction was good and relevant. Just looking at one figure on that slide on the right-hand side, so even in the responsible investment AUM that we see here, that's plus 8% in terms of sustainable AUM versus the end of the last year. A very significant increase, which is a testimony, if you want, of these long-term trends that we see across clients. There are talks, but what we hear from our clients worldwide is a sustained commitment towards these matters. Why? Because it's material, because it's part of their fiduciary duties. Second news, we are staying the course. Here you see the list of the 10 strategic objectives announced to the market by Amundi. What you need to realize here is that not only are these objectives, we believe, ambitious, but they've been framed in a way to put us in capacity to generate value and deliver value to our clients. See the net zero commitment. We commit to net zero, to support net zero, but we do so by developing products with the aim to build a resilient portfolio, to generate alpha, but that requires the validation from our clients. We develop a product, and then clients decide whether they want to invest in that product or not, and we have to promote that product on its own merits. There are no hidden agenda. Second, client-centric value generation commitment that we take. We talked about technology. This is really a core building block of our growth strategy. Amundi has a leading software of portfolio management, which is called Alto. Well, Alto Climate enables us to provide advanced climate stress tests, testing different scenarios to see how resilient portfolio can be vis-à-vis different transition risks. Here again, it's not only about ESG and sustainability, it's not only about making the world better. For us, it's about delivering value to our clients. Last but not least, commitment to engage, plus 1,000 linked to climate change. Why are we doing so? Not just to look good, because we think it's the right thing to do to ensure that in the long run, our portfolios will be able to maintain their value and to keep on growing. And that's a systemic risk that we think we should be addressing as well through the commitment lever. If you look at that particular chart, you can see the consistency of Amundi's commitment when it comes to stewardship. And you see there on the right-hand side that Amundi's commitment has remained stable over the years. This hasn't been the case necessarily for all global managers because of ESG backlash and certain political pressures. Well, for us, that is a business opportunity. And I can commit and tell you that, or bet that next year, part of our growth will be coming from the fact that we stay the course when it comes to engagement on climate, because it is centered on materiality, it is centered on the value creation. Now, to address a bit the elephant in the room, before turning back to where we stand in terms of secular trends, the results of the last election. Clearly, many of you, and you would be right to say so, may consider that this is clearly not a tailwind, but a headwind when it comes to sustainable investing. The platform of the president-elect was very clear on a certain number of parameters. Number one, America first, which is very much associated to the motto, drill, drill, drill. That's more fossil fuel leaning, some of you may think, than renewable energy leaning. Second, deregulation, and we see the DOGE minister being developed and making some announcement. Well, if you think about it, ESG materiality is linked to ESG regulation. So when you start deregulating, you might think that this is going to have an impact as well on that materiality. And last but not least, he felt in the EU that the EU had no plan really to address the key competitiveness issue they were facing and they would continue facing in the next administration. Well, just to give you our conviction, it's a bit too early to tell you the end of the story for the next 2 and 4 years, but I'd like to propose a slightly more nuanced view of that agenda. Why? Number one, because we've reached inflection point where renewable energy and green tech are by and large competitive on their own merits. And if you take one key laboratory, a live laboratory in the US, I'm calling the Texas state. Texas state has the most free market electricity market in the United States and in the world, while Texas is number one in the US in terms of wind, it's second in terms of solar PV, it's third in terms of penetration of electric vehicle, it's number one in terms of battery development in the pipeline. That's an illustration of the inflection point that we see. And if you have a free market agenda, and if you have a cheap energy, cheap electricity, competitiveness agenda, well, that is supportive, we argue, of a green agenda and renewable energy. Second, deregulation. What's the main impediment to renewable energy development? Well, it's also regulation. If you take the number of years between project origination, permitting, development, connection to the grid, it takes on average 10 years to be connected, to connect a new wind farm, a new solar PV farm. That can be significantly reduced, and again, this will be a growth driver when it comes to renewable energy. And for the EU, well, there is a question of alignment of planet between sovereignty and energy consideration, which remains valid. EU has had a track record of doing the right thing when it had its back against the wall. So it's too early to say, but it's probably not the end of the story there as well. So the secular trends that we highlighted. Number one, green industrial policies. Well, we believe they're here to stay. Why? Because it's about superpowers competing with each other to remain dominant, but also simply relevant in the 21st century. China of course, has been invested the most, and you see this 38% of total capital worldwide invested towards low carbon technologies to be the dominant power in PVs, in batteries, and related green technologies. And of course, you can think, all of you, about electric vehicles. That has triggered a chain reaction by the US with the Inflation Reduction Act that's been sponsored not by the energy minister, but by the advisor on security, by the way, and second, reaction from the EU. That's here to stay. There's been one United States CEO that's been calling publicly for the United States to remain within the Paris Agreement and to keep the Inflation Reduction Act. Well, that's the CEO of ExxonMobil. So I can't tell you what's going to happen of the full Inflation Reduction Act package. I'm just saying that it's been very supportive of many Republican states, and business is supportive of the Inflation Reduction Act provisions in many instances. Second secular trend is not only about public spending, it's about technological breakthrough and the competitiveness I was alluding to. What you see here on that chart is the drop in cost for solar PV and onshore winds. What you don't see here, but you will have the similar chart, is of course the cost of batteries. And coupling batteries with renewable energy, with intermittent energy, change completely the configuration and offer the possibility to use renewable energy as a baseload energy. This is what we start seeing in southern Australia. This is what we start seeing in California and Texas more and more. So the game changer in this year has been the pace of development that you see in battery storage addition. Two figures to share to really illustrate the tipping point that we've reached, inflection point that we reached. Number one, if you focus on the new power capacity being brought to the market in 23, what's been the ratio between fossil fuel and renewable energy? It's been 91% in favor of renewable energy. When I ask my clients worldwide, most of the time they get this completely wrong. They think it's 5%, 10%, 20%, 50%. Well, it's 91%. So it's a bit game over in terms of developing new capabilities. Ratio of clean energy investment versus fossil fuel, it's 2-to-1. Not to say that this is good enough, but it's there, it's happening, the transition, if not the revolution, is real. Now, what's feedbacks from the corporate boardrooms? The feedbacks from the corporate boardrooms are that this is all about long-term planning. This is not about planning for the next 2 years. This is about building resilience business model for the next 5, 10, 20 years. And this is a long-term play. Again, I use the same reference to the CEO of ExxonMobil. One thing to bear in mind is that this is not only about experiencing the physical impact of climate change. This is also about feeling the impact of interconnected issues, notably linked to nature. So what we have in mind is a big issue in terms of our ability to assess the climate change impact on the value chain of companies. That's a big unknown because the data are simply not available yet sufficiently. But it's also about nature. And you take a big chocolate maker in the United States is facing similar issues than one of the biggest dairy companies in Europe. They know how to make their operations more sustainable. They struggle to get the financing to make their upstream value chain more sustainable. And that's a key risk for them that they need to address because the risk is now. It's not tomorrow. And that's the reason why we believe in this year of apparent setback, well, the level of commitment keep growing. I've alluded to the SBTI number plus 67% last year. This year, we are at plus 30% here again in a year of apparent setback. That's being supported by regulatory development. Just one regulatory development that you should all have in mind today, it's CSRD. There's going to be rationalization, yet this is the most ambitious, homogeneous regulatory disclosure framework ever developed, which is going to propose an homogeneous disclosure regulation for 50,000 companies. That's a game changer from that standpoint. Just to illustrate my point in terms of corporate taking action because it's material, not because of policies, well, take the US climate disclosure landscape. This is not because it's imposed by the SEC. It's because, number one, it's material, because number two, it's required in many jurisdictions. And if you take the ESG report of a company called Liberty Energy, which is not, some of you may think, the most liberal or ESG-leaning company, well, it's 183 pages long. Why? Simply because ESG factors matter even in the shale industry. We're talking about material risk factors here. There are some unknowns. It's been said in terms of AI. AI is a game changer in terms of ability to manage the grid smartly. Yet it's going to be a drag because the demand is simply staggering. We're talking about X2, X3 between now and 2030, whereas we were in the world of plus 2%. To wrap up. So these are the unknowns for this year. Now what we've seen on financial market, and just two things here. Number one, in terms of when you see net flows, think about that with the level of penetration we have across funds in the ESG market. When you see net outflows and inflows, it's mostly about asset rotation. When you have above 50% ESG funds versus non-ESG funds. In terms of performances, the key is to understand the biases that you embark when you select an ESG framework. In a concentrated market that was alluding to by Vafa, well, SRI index, for instance, because they focus on market cap and the plus 25%, might be not necessarily the best bet. Yet there is significant value to get from these indices. Impact is in very high demand. We should all focus on that together. It's potentially a game changer to really capture the demand that we see. And that's a demand that is global. It's not only Europe, Asia, but if you look at US versus Europe, the demand for sustainable investment, and that's a US bank, by the way, making that analysis, is very much the same. It's very high, but we have challenges to capture that demand because we feel we need to build better impact products with better stories. So in terms of the conviction, to conclude on that note, number one, yes, it's a disorderly transition for sure, but it's a transition that is coming with acute physical risk and transition risk, and we should all prepare our portfolios for that. Net zero allocation makes sense to build resilience portfolio, but it needs to come with agility and nimbleness because it's all about timing. And you can get the timing wrong or the timing right in terms of over-anticipating green demand or under-anticipating green demand for many products. And the last note, it's really to focus on sustainability and positive solution, which is the number one driver to get retail clients into this product. Thank you very much.
티모티 줄랑 좋은 발표 감사합니다. 시간이 자꾸 이제 다가가고 있어가지고요. 다음은 이하나가 부탁드리겠습니다.
Well, my key message is, my part is stewardship. And stewardship to me is about influencing. Why? Well, at the end of the day, any sustainability financial issues are result of corporate actions or inactions. And we as investors must exert influence to help them make behavioral changes as much as possible. Well, this is for our clients and this is for our asset growth, but of course, this is for the planet. That's where Amundi has been sort of striving for. I created this chart just to put the stewardship into perspective, and it's about influencing at the end of the day. But the message here is a long journey. It's not one-off meeting, okay? So we need a continual effort while setting the bar higher and higher. and the situation is changing, and the climate change situation is now worsening, and we really have to take conscious actions above and beyond words. That's where we engage clients, corporates. Well, this slide is about what Amundi does in general, and we start with the individual companies' issues in terms of ESG and others, but those issues can be characterized into the 5 buckets like this. So starting from climate, natural capital, human rights or human capital, and the product quality, and plus governance. And it's important to mention that we maintain double materiality approach, which is that it's not just only how the environmental and social factors affect corporates' financial aspects, but also we do consider those companies, how those companies affect environmental and social issues. So that's important for us to be relevant in the real world as a financial player. Okay, so please take a look at these 2 slides, and these are slides about the engagement in climate-related issues. And the point I'd like to make here in this chart is that situation is dynamic. Okay, so it's not that having a corporate to have some relevant corporate strategy, that's the end of it. No, situation is changing, so we continue to ask for higher commitment, greater ambition, right, with a time bound. And second one is about the what we done with the J-Power. It's a public information, and the key message here is that we have multiple levers to influence corporates. One is, of course, one-on-one engagement. Another is collective engagement. And there are ways to express our opinions through proxy voting and also shareholder proposals. And, this is more relevant for us, for Korean and Japanese investors. It's about corporate value creation. And I have to say, our countries have something in common on that respect. And look at this, PBR have been hovering around 1.0 times, which is not good. So that's why Japan and I think Korea is taking steps toward enhance the enterprise value. How do we do that? Well, first thing is corporate governance. Like I have said at the beginning, it's about corporate behavior at the end of the day, and corporate behavior is determined by management. And so there must be some room to improve the way corporates make their decisions. That is corporate governance. And this chart shows that the difference between the OECD average ESG, governance score of Amundi versus Korea and Japanese companies' corporate ratings. And as you see, these 2 companies' distributions are skewed toward left, which means that we have to continue working on the governance, like efficient oversight of a board or independence, adding more external directors who are independent, plus gender diversity or cognitive diversity of it. And this is where that I would say is a very starting point. And capital efficiency, financial performance. And I have plotted the trajectories of the return on equity figures of the major indices, COPSI, topics, stocks, and S&P 500. And sadly, our numbers are very above the required rate of return. So, well, in Japan, it's been 10 years since the corporate governance reform started, particularly focusing on capital efficiency. But 10 years was not enough for those companies to make change. That's why the TSE, Tokyo Stock Exchange, has taken upper hand and asking corporate management, okay, why don't you guys think more about cost of capital? Have you guys thought about the how you are reflected, perceived in the market? It's a big message. It's about value creation. So what is taking place in Japan right now is a more of a buybacks or dividend payment, and belatedly revisiting the mixture of their business portfolios. I think as an extension of a governance engagement, same thing should happen in this market here. And well, this is a bit the busy slide, but the moral of the story is that this academic research shows we do see sort of benefit of engagement, through multiple players. Well, I'm not going to cover the boarding part, and like Timothée has said, we are really, really consistent. We haven't changed our sort of philosophy, and so we are really sort of keen to continue influencing corporates, both for their sustainability of their business models and sustainability of our world. That's the message from me. Thank you.
네, 약속대로 짧게 또 아주 강한 인사이트를 주고 발표해 주셔서 감사드립니다. 시간이 많이 돼서요. 사실은 제가 이 두 분 발표를 미리 보고 질문 한 3가지 정도 준비했습니다만 딱 한 가지만 질문을 드리고자 합니다. 티모티 줄랑. ISSB가 그 S1, S2로 상징되는 이제 글로벌 베이스라인으로 지속 가능성 기준을 제시했습니다. 그래서 이제 전 세계적으로 지속 가능성 기준 채택과 함께 표준화되고 비교 가능한 ESG 정보 공시가 이제 본격화될 것인데, 그렇다면 이러한 정보 공시가 책임 투자의 흐름에는 어떤 영향을 미치게 될지 짧게 답변 부탁드리겠습니다.
I think it's going to make our life much easier because disclosure is the starting point, but it's certainly not the end of the journey, because corporates have a tendency to get slightly different interpretation even though they espouse the same standards. Number one. The second is that there are still debates on what should be considered as material under S1 and S2 in ISSB. And the third message I'd like to pass here, it's more an advocacy / lobbying message, is that we don't believe necessarily in the fight of standards, because often the discussion is between ISSB versus EU standards and specific local standards in the rest of the world. Well, we believe very much that, number one, those standards are compatible to a large extent, and number two, that we're going to see a certain level of convergence between, for instance, CSRD in the EU and the international voluntary standards of ISSB S1 and S2.
제가 오늘 이 글로벌 컨퍼런스에 참석하면서 느낀 거는, 사실 제가 참석했던 그 어떤 컨퍼런스에 비해서 여기 참여하신 모든 분들의 집중도나 이런 것들이 대단히 경청하고 집중적인 에너지가 이쪽 컨퍼런스 룸에 꽉 찬 것 같아가지고 사실 굉장히 인상적이었습니다. 계속해서 그 NPS라고 하는 큰 에셋 오너에서 그 자산 배분이라든지 투자 운용에 대해서 고민하면서 제가 이 자산 운용의 변곡점은 무엇일까라고 생각을 했는데, 아까 이제 그 변곡점에 대한 발표를 하면서 이 자산 운용의 변곡점에서 지속 가능성 기반의 투자가 또 중요한 변곡점이 되지 않을까. 지금까지 우리가 살펴봤던 투자 판단을 넘어서는 그런 생각이 들었고요. 그리고 오늘 이제 여기가 글로벌 컨퍼런스이기 때문에 다 한국 사람들은 한국말로 했는데 제가 못하는 영어 떠듬떠듬 하지만 그래도 여기 참석하신 외국인들을 위해서 제가 준비한 마지막 저의 메시지를 좀 전달하고자 합니다. 짧게 말씀드리겠습니다. With the election of President Trump, uncertainties surrounding ESG investment environment and trends, particularly regarding climate change, have significantly increased. However, as disclosure standards for non-financial information related to sustainability, such as climate change, biodiversity, human capital, and human rights, are gradually adopted across the global capital market and the related information becomes available, it is highly likely that sustainability-related investment by investors will become more sophisticated and expand in scale. Following a period of temporary confusion and stagnation, the period of opportunities will come. This seems to be a time when the effort for exploring that opportunities and implementing effective strategies is more critical than ever. I would like to sincerely thank both speakers, Timothee Jaulin and IWANAGA, for excellent presentation. Thank you. 감사합니다.